Moments ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa had concluded an address alongside the Brazilian president, and this is a two-day state bilateral visit with the aim of expediting the agreements that are in place to make sure that trade cooperation, amongst others, becomes to its full potential. Only 10% of the potential of trade between South Africa and Brazil is currently exploited. We're going to be speaking to Professor Patrick Bond on that conversation in a short while. We're going to be speaking to Professor Ngomezulu on the ongoing negotiations and precarious future of the government of Provincial Unity Coalition in KwaZulu-Natal. What will come of that? Given the interesting take on the numbers, a 40-40 split down the line. But the Constitution is quite clear: to have a motion of no confidence pass through, you need 50% plus one. And so ultimately, either side, well, if the side that wants to remove the current government does not have 41 votes on their side, they will unfortunately be unable to do so. We'll get into the details of that a little bit later on. And of course, the war in Iran has sent oil prices skyrocketing, reaching highs not seen in the last couple of years. Importantly, this has caused major disruptions to energy supply chains across the world, affecting many parts of the world, including South Africa. Do we have local alternative resources that can help us stomach and absorb the impact this will have? And importantly, what policy measurements and instruments can be used to sustain us through this global crisis? All of that and more coming up on the show. But I want to lead with this. President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged both Brazil and South Africa to take full advantage of their 2010 strategic partnership to enhance diplomatic, political, economic and commercial relations between the two countries. Ramaphosa is in Brazil on a state visit at the invitation of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Patrick Bond is a distinguished professor and director at the Center of Social Change at the University of Johannesburg, and he joins us now in studio. Brazil is an incredibly large country. In fact, population estimates are close to 300 million, somewhere between 250 to 300 million, which would be a massive market for South Africa if we exploited it properly. But much like South Africa, the difficulties of inequality and staggered development plague the country as well, making it difficult to take full potential of that. South Africa and Brazil are similar in many ways such as that. What will it take really to see the potential of this relationship come to fruition?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Oliver. Great to be with you, and hi to the viewers. Look, the other big similarity is that we're both primary product exporters, but Brazil is taking quite I think, benefits from the high oil price. They have a state company called Petrobras. That company has actually looked to invest in South Africa on the offshore fields in the Western Cape, Northern Cape actually, and that may or may not work. Namibia probably has a better chance. There have been two other companies from Brazil. One in construction, Odebrecht, mostly in Angola, a little bit in Mozambique. Another, Vale, mostly in Mozambique. But they're very corrupt. I don't say that without legal cover, because they've been prosecuted, and so has Petrobras. So we have a problem. Primary product and corrupt companies from Brazil. And we don't really have much to offer Brazil, especially because we can't undercut the Chinese competitors. Both countries have been deindustrializing because we have really been suffering from excessive capacity in the Chinese market. So half of our cars now from China and India, our steel market crushed, our chrome smelters crushed. So I think that's the commonality. And yet, Oliver, we're both South Africa and Brazil in the BRICS, the main democracies that are critical of the US, India being the other, hosting. Last year, Brazil hosted...
Actually, let me pause you there. What is Lula da Silva's posture towards the West, and in particular America and Trump right now?
It's mixed, because once that Trump allied with Lula's main competitor, a man called Jair Bolsonaro, his predecessor as president. Lula had been president in the 2000s. His successor, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached in a fake corruption trial. But then when Bolsonaro took over from the years 2019 to 2022, and then in 2023 tried to have a coup, well, he was put in jail. And that's what Trump reacted to and said, we want 50% tariffs on Brazilian exports to the U.S. And Brazil, had a trade deficit with the U.S., so it was sort of nonsense for Trump to do that. It was just pure political retribution to punish Lula. And that's similar to South Africa, the allegation that there's a white genocide or that there's somehow some, critique of U.S. racism. Perhaps there was something to that. But I think the main thing for Brazil is it could take a much greater lead now in opposing the U.S. as it goes to war with Israel against Iran and against really so many norms of international law. And the dilemma is that if you think that Brazil is connected to the U.S. in many ways, but it's also connected to Israel through Petrobras, through its 9% supply of oil, just like South Africa through Glencore and African Rainbow Minerals through coal. So we have a lot of complications, and I'm just hoping that in that private meeting, there could be some way forward. Last September, Brazil tried to have a tariffs meeting of the BRICS. It was hosting the BRICS last year, and it failed. There was nothing that came out of that meeting that said to Trump, "You've got to stop the tariffs." It was actually only the Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago. So maybe, as India takes up the BRICS hosting, this group, at least South Africa and Brazil, as the main democracies opposed to U.S. imperialism, will actually be able to do something. That's what we're hoping they're consulting over right now.
Diplomatic resources are finite, both in terms of capacity as well as time. And so you have to make the opportunity cost calculations when you engage diplomatically with other countries. Does the political economy structure of Brazil warrant us to invest in a bilateral relationship with them instead of just continuing to invest in BRICS as a multilateral body and reap the benefit through that, instead of what could potentially be seen as a duplication of diplomatic efforts?
Well, it's also duplication of economic relationships, because these are both mineral exporters. I mean, the main areas that we probably have more export potential would be gold and platinum, but the entire world is demanding them. The prices are very high. So I don't see much in what President Ramaphosa suggests, that you need to come and invest and you need to trade. As I say, the three big Brazilian companies have had quite a disastrous role here. Instead, it's more that these are giant democracies of the global south, and if they can break out of a sort of sub-imperial relationship with the West, which sometimes they fall into, and actually be multipolar in character. This is the claim, with the desire that BRICS would change multilateral relationships. This could be terribly important. And again, this isn't what we heard in the speech a few minutes ago. We heard much more about, I smell money in the room, and I fear that's not really going to generate much more than a smell.
Yeah, like I said, Brazil's population is 3.5 times the size of South Africa's population, and usually that's an economic advantage to a country that would hope to be a net exporter to that country. Is there anything South Africa produces, manufactures, that Brazil might potentially need that we, at this moment, can take advantage of?
No, it's actually the other way around, and I mean, the basic point you made earlier, South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. And we overtook Brazil in 1994, which was then the most unequal. What Lula did was raise minimum wages and provided a Bolsa Familia, a social grant. So inequality came down there while it rose here. In that sense, what I see Brazil potentially being able to do is to restart its economic activities from the bottom up. I think we need to do that too, but the extreme inequality in a place like this and the character of export industries, which are still based on mining and petrochemicals, that's just duplication of what Brazil already has, except for gold and platinum. And again, if we see these are great potential allies in promoting world democracy, I hope that's where their attention lies, and not in games about corporates that may or may not be able to do deals. There's not much there in my view.
Yeah, how do you mitigate the risk of global disruptions? Brazil is as vulnerable to the war in the Middle East as South Africa is at the moment, and you would hope that your major trade partners, as we want them to become, aren't as vulnerable.
Yes, I mean, what Petrobras, the big oil company, will benefit from oil well over $100 a barrel, whereas we're importing that oil. So that would be obviously a place where you'd hope that relationships are just across the ocean, a ship away. I would worry, though, that if we do remain so reliant, and Petrobras comes in and does offshore oil and especially gas drilling off the west coast and maybe up into Namibia, that may make the kind of relationships that we have with multinational oil companies, those aren't pretty. I mean, they tend to involve climate change, emissions, and corruption, and local ecological destruction. So Petrobras, because Brazil hosted the climate summit last year, it's actually quite a problem for President Lula, especially we add that they're exporting oil to Israel at a time genocide's going on and this terrible war.
Yeah, and of course, the Orange Basin remains contentious, at least in the courts, that is.
Yeah.
We're going to have to leave it there. Prof. Bond, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Professor Patrick Bond is with the University of Johannesburg.